Hello YouTube. I wanted to put together a video similar to what Kelly Cowan did. I put an excellent video together on replacing a clutch pack. But as I got into doing mine, I found some additional details that were helpful for me once I got into the case and looked around. So I wanted to capture some of that detail here. I've provided the link to Kelly's original video. I suggest you watch that first. That has most of everything you'll need. And then I also wanted to provide some of the highlights that he referenced as well, but directly from the service manual. So I'll have that at the back of the video. It has a lot of the torque values, where the shorter bolts are, those things you have to take off, that kind of thing. But also my configuration is slightly different in that it has the LLoydz variable pressure clutch plate kit on it as part of the Supercharger. So I'll provide some additional detail on that and how that might differ from your configuration. Doesn't really matter much. It's just an additional add-on to an existing clutch system. So you can still use this video, hopefully get some benefit from that. Anyway, we'll move on to the videos, and then again, I've got some of the pages from the service manual at the very last of the video. You can skip forward if you like to that. Thanks. Hopefully you find it useful. Appreciate it. I want to do an update to a video about replacing a clutch pack, except this one's with the Barnett plate kit. Happens to be a LLoydz variable clutch plate as well, but really the only thing that adds is the outer plate. All of the inner stuff is still stock inside. So one of the things I noticed before was that the clip ring detail wasn't really called out all that much. So this is the one that you'll be taking out after you compress the spring. That's the larger outer one. The inner one is for this clutch hub that you'll pull out. That one you'll pull out first to put in your tool, and then you'll compress down the spring. I've marked it with a red just so, because there's a machined edge, it says make sure that's facing out. So I just mark them with a little red dot so I'll know when I put them back in. I won't have to sit there and mess around with them. Alright, taking the cover off, I did go ahead and drain the oil. I had to do some supercharger maintenance and other stuff anyway, so I drained my oil, but there's still quite a bit of mess. Underneath here, you'll get a lot of oil dripping once you start cracking the case to get it off of there. I suggest having a rag or maybe even some saran wrap. Stick that in there, and the sticky kind that you can just wrap over the tubing. That way when it does drip out, it doesn't get all over the tubes and start smoking later once you get back up and running. It does mention there's spacers on here. There's one on this side. There's one on this side as well. See the angle. Make sure those are still in place and not damaged from pulling out. That's why you pull it out on it evenly. I ended up having to reuse this guy, sticking it back into the cover, and use this to grab a finger hold on to pull out evenly. And then once you do that, you can remove it the rest of the way. But that's the only way I could really get my fingers in and pull evenly, was to kind of put this back in the primary, use it to crack it open a little bit with a little bit of leverage, and then it would come out the rest of the way. Alright, first step says remove the clutch hub by pulling out the snap ring here. So let's see if I can get this on video sufficiently. There we go. Just place that out. Alright, now the clutch hub should be able to remove that. Slides right out. Okay. Alright, the next part is installing the hub so that you can compress the springs down enough to get the retaining clip out, which is this guy right here. So the hub's got to go in, replace the retaining ring that we just took out to fix the hub in place, and then you can put the spring compression tool on. Others have made those. I chose to buy them. You can see the part numbers here. They seem like nice adapters. This guy is specific. You'll notice it looks just like the clutch hub, has the same 3 nubs. This guy's generic. You can use that on your Harleys too. So nice tool, rather expensive, but yeah, feel free to make your own. Alright, next step is to install the hub back into it, you'll notice there's a thicker side or a wider side, the printed side, versus the smaller circle diameter that you're seeing there. In this case, when I first put this in, I thought maybe, hey, the printing goes face up, but in reality it does not. It goes face down. You may have a different adapter, but if you do get this one, it goes in this way, not that way. So slides in like so. Next step, install the snap ring back in place. It's kind of hard to do one-handed. There we go. Let's make sure that's seated good. Okay. At this point, you should be able to attach this guy, compress the spring a little bit, and then pull this outer snap ring to release the pressure, and then pull off the plates. Okay, once you get your snap ring back in place, you thread the bolt through the adapter inside, right? Inside here, it says 4 or 5 times on the instructions for this guy. And then you run this bolt down so it's snug. There's 2 large openings here. Make sure you use one of these is lined up with where the snap ring is, so you can get your tool in there once it's compressed, your snap ring tool, and actually reach it. So rotate this into the right position. From there, it just says use a couple of wrenches, keep the bolt steady, rotate the nut. That'll force it down, compress the spring enough, reach the spring to take it out. Alright, so I've done basically 3 half turns from here to here on the wrench for this guy. So starting from here, going around 3 times. And now I've got enough play in here, and the ring is fairly loose. So next step is I'll try to get in there and get that little snap ring out. Okay, you'll notice I've kind of rotated it out of the way so I can get my snap ring pliers on it. You know, this guy was actually underneath here. That's what it says in the instructions. When you put it back on, make sure one end is under one of these posts. But for now, I've kind of rotated it up so that I could get both sets of the pliers on there to pull that out. Okay, got my pliers on there. This is to pull in a little bit. Try to compress that guy. Get him pulled out. Alright, I wasn't able to do it while holding this at the same time, but here's the ring. Able to get both teeth on there and just extract it just like you did with the clutch hub. Okay, once we got the spring clip out, the whole setup comes out together. Alright, this is the Barnett clutch kit. It's got the special one on the back end. The plates are all pretty much identical except for this one that goes along with the judder, and new steel plates in between. Now I've already had to figure out the rolled edge versus the sharp edge that was mentioned on the previous video. The only way I found the easiest way to do this is with the tip of your fingernail. I tried taking pictures, I tried doing everything, but really the easiest way is just use the tip of your fingernail. It's fairly easy to figure out which ones are which. I've already stacked them in the right order. You'll notice the top one, this is what's different on the Barnett clutch kit. It says in the manual, the service manual, 10A is a special outer ring. It's the last one that goes up against your pressure plate. It says it has wider pads. Well, in the Barnett kit, they're all the same. You'll notice, except for the one nearest the judder, right? They all have wider pads, so it's a little bit different. That's why you might be confused when you open it up and you see a different number of friction plates overall. Anyway, I've marked them all, got them in the right order. I'll get these soaking and then we'll put them on in this exact order, reusing the judder seat and the little concave judder spring inside the clutch. That's the part you'll reuse. Alright, I wanted to capture a few notes on what I've seen and the differences from the stock clutch that comes out of the Vic versus the Barnett update, and then compare lastly what the Supercharger based clutch kit will look like. So you'll notice in the diagram from the service manual, basically 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 all the way through 10A. That makes up most of your plates, right? In a standard kit from Barnett, you'll reuse number 6 and 7, which is your judder spring seat and the diaphragm judder spring, right? Then you'll get in the Barnett kit, this is the remaining judder friction plate, right? The smaller one compared to the normal friction plates. So all in all, you'll have 9 standard friction plates, 6 and 7 reused, 9 steels, and then the 1 judder friction. So a total of 10 frictions, 1 of them special, and then 9 steel plates. So what I've noticed is that on a Supercharger, most of the judder related stuff is taken away. So 6, 7, and 8, those are all gone. And that's replaced by another standard another standard friction plate for a Barnett. So it's still 10 frictions, 9 steels, but there's something special about that. One of the steels I've noticed is 1.96 millimeters versus 1.48 millimeters. So that's really the difference on a Supercharger. I think as far as the placement of where the steel should go, it came out as the last plate in the clutch hub, so I'll continue that path, but I talked to Lloyd and those guys said it really doesn't matter. You can put it in first or last, but either way, just pick a consistent position. Okay, for this part, I've got all of my friction plates and steels lined up in the appropriate order. You'll notice in the manual it talks about having the clutch basket there on the bottom, so the rolled edges up, the sharp edges for the steel plates up as well, so the rolled edge to rolled edge kind of thing, right? Sharp edge to sharp edge. I think some have mentioned online, doesn't really matter as long as you keep it consistent, whether the rolled edge is up or the sharp edge is down. But either way, that's how I've got them situated right now. Okay. So with this kit, I'll just start with the top one. Basically, rolls up into here. Said to oil it really good, so I've done that, and then just kind of place it into the basket. Okay. Then you'll go with the steel next. This comes up. Just line up the teeth, slide that in, and continue on in the same order. Just keep going. And so on and so forth, and we'll catch back up once they're all back in. Alright, I've completed loading all of the plates in. You'll notice it's pretty flush with all of the plates. For a Supercharger setup, this basket is different too, right? That's from LLoydz. So if you're doing a clutch kit, a standard clutch kit, this gap or this flushness may be slightly different for you. Just the way I think this clutch hub is made from LLoydz, it's milled slightly different. So it's got 10 standard frictions and 9 steels, with one of the steels being the thicker. Like I'd mentioned before, it's 1.96 millimeters thick versus 1.46 millimeters. I think that's to make up the difference for the judder spring and the seat that are no longer there. So that I have this, the thicker plate is the last plate on this hub. It's right behind this friction plate, so it's outermost. As well, before I button it up, I wanted to make sure this is back on appropriately. Usually this comes off with the primary cover, this whole assembly. You'll notice there's a couple of bars in there, which is part of the spring on the back side of this. Just make sure the rod goes in between the spring, that this still moves back and forth, just check it for cracks in the spring, that kind of thing, and then make sure it's sitting on the teeth where it's supposed to be and it's fully seated. Somebody else had made a recommendation online about adding this extra washer, which comes from your oil change kit that you don't necessarily need. It's one of the crush washers, I believe, to take off some of the slop, the in and out slop. When the primary cover's on, you pull on your you pull on your shift lever, you'll notice it can come in and out a little bit. So somebody recommended sliding that onto the shaft. And there's a clip back here, obviously, that's fixed in place. There you go, into a notch. So it's not going anywhere there. I think this just will take up the extra slop. So I'll put that on there and then put the primary on and see if that improves anything. All right, after all the clutch plates are back in, it's just a matter of reassembling everything. So last piece is the clutch plate itself. That'll go in. I still have the adapter mounted in there with a snap ring, you'll notice, so we can just reattach it. Get everything back in there. You've got your concave plate. This is the stock one. It's got a green mark on it, you'll notice there at the top. That's still the standard one that goes in. Just fits right on top there. And you want to line up your notches, right, so that it can fit onto these posts. So I'll line those up a little bit. Okay, get all those lined up, and then of course at this point, if you don't have the Lloyd's, you don't have to worry about this step. But you'll notice the extra little ring is already built into the Lloyd's variable. So there's a little L-shaped ring that the service manual talks about having to put in for this to line up into. You won't have to worry about that if you have the Lloyd's variable, because it's actually built into this assembly right here. So that assembly will simply sit down on top of it. You'll line up all your notches as well, and then the whole thing will fit up onto here, and then we'll put the adapter back on. We'll screw it back down and give it some compression, and then put the snap rings back in. Okay, we'll show that next. Alright, so I've got the clutch plate just loosely installed. So I've got the bolt screwed in 5 or 6 times into the adapter in the back. I've got most of the teeth. It looks like you try to line up the teeth. You'll probably have to make some minor adjustments as you screw down this bolt to give the pressure plate tension. Alright, so I've got everything completely compressed. Snap ring is back in there. You'll notice on the 2 posts that the ends of the snap ring are actually under each post. You don't want to leave a gap or leave the the snap ring exposed where you grab onto it. So that part right there is seated. Let's see if I can get a better view on this as well. You'll notice that the posts all have little teeth, and there's a groove in there, and the snap ring sits inside the groove. Let's see if I could get a view over here. There you go. See, on the side where the snap ring sits, there's grooves. You have to make sure that that snap ring is seated in the grooves all the way around on all of those teeth. I had to take mine off and try again. By putting it on there, I rotated the whole assembly, half a post or something, and then tried again to get it all seated in there. But you got to make sure those are underneath all of those teeth. Otherwise, let me get a point right here, right there. Right there is where you want it. Otherwise, when you release pressure on this, it may pop that retaining spring out. So on each post, just make sure that it's seated right up under there. Alright, here's a better view of the retaining ring that goes around. It's the little red dot I talked about, so you know what the sharp edge is up. You'll notice all of the posts, it's sitting under the ring. I've taken all the pressure out. My adapter is still in here for the clutch hub assembly. This little guy, right? It'll go back in last, and then we'll button everything up. But I wanted to show the posts and how the 2 teeth are sitting underneath the posts instead of out here in the open. Well, that's the position that they should be in. There is a groove in here that it also has to sit down into. I don't know if you can see the side of it. but it's, you know, it's right in here. There's a groove all the way around that ring has to sit into. Make sure this guy's pushed all the way in, and then push that in. I used a finger at the top, and then the pressure from the pliers, right, to push in on the bottom and try to get it seated evenly, and then it'll just kind of snap into place. But yeah, double check once you've released it that it's sitting in the groove all the way around. Okay, ready to reassemble the primary. I took the advice to get some bolts. Here's what I picked up from the hardware store. I painted the ends. I cut the heads off and painted that part red so that I would know which part is, you know, got a clean thread. But here's what I bought, if that helps you. Then I just used a Dremel, cut off the heads, and yeah, used a red Sharpie to do that. So basically, yeah, you do the same instructions. You know, just get them started into the holes. That'll help you with the gasket, and place those around, and then we'll come back and put the gasket in place. Okay, let's get those started, and then yep, just do that all the way around, and then also make sure on the edges, right, that you got all the old gasket off. It needs to be cleaned up pretty good. I used mostly plastic when possible to chip off any pieces. And then on the primary cover, same thing. This one took a lot more effort to get clean on the edges. I had some fairly significant pitting too, I think, probably from the chroming process, but you know, tried to clean that as good as I can. Ran a razor blade along the edge just at an angle to catch off, you know, any little extra burrs or anything left over, and made sure it was smooth all the way around. Take your time on that though. Don't want to scratch anything off the case, but make sure that's clean, otherwise you're probably going to have a leak. Okay, here we are with the gasket on. The gasket really only will go one way, but you'll notice there's a kind of a sealant on one side and standard paper on the other. That's why the primary cover itself takes a little more time to get the gunk off, because of the sealer is on this side. But like I said, it really only goes on one way. You'll know by the circle that ends up on this side. But anyway, that's kind of where I put my bolt placements. That seemed to help it lay flat real quick, and we'll put the primary on. Alright, got the primary back on. There's a little bit of slop. I just haven't put any bolts on. The red bolt placement is still put in there just to hold it in. You have to reconnect. Yeah, don't forget that. I have my skirt off, so it's easy to route to the other side to the connector underneath, but make sure you reconnect that. Put in your bolts. You'll have to rotate in here, this guy, to line up your shaft. That'll go in. You'll set it at an angle, just kind of feel it for a little bit, and then once it sets in there, you'll feel it grab. Then there's a little bolt that goes in there to hold it in place. That's a small little pin bolt. I think it's yeah, this little guy right here. So that's all there is to it. I'll have to check for leaks. There's one other thing I did. I don't know if I captured this before. I took out the bolt holding the lines, the line clamp, just to give myself a little more room to work when I was taking it off and putting it on, to make sure I didn't pinch any wires. So if you want to do that, that might help. You may not need to, depending on your configuration. I think I've got a different set of oil lines here because of the way the Supercharger was run, but you may not have that issue. So just be aware of that. You may take a bolt off here and here if necessary, to give yourself a little bit more room to play on the bottom side of the primary. One other additional tip, as I was putting it on, I put my fingers like this to keep that seal in. It wants to kind of come out when you're pushing on the case a little bit. I got just a soft rubber mallet and was kind of tapping down here, and I noticed that the seal kind of wants to come out a little bit. So I just put my fingers on there as I was pushing in to keep that in there, and that'll keep that from leaking on you.